Ne Ha ha ha. I cannot begin to tell you how many times over the last 4 months, and if I'm being perfectly honest, it feels like it's been so much longer than that, that I have written or recorded a note on my phone, some version of this message. Can't even tell you. So hopefully this is the last. Well, it is the last because it's here, but that's fine. It's a message I think that I mean, I see it a lot in, like my algorithms on what social media have left is a lot of coaching and personal empowerment and that kind of stuff. And so I see it a lot on there, but I want to share my experience with it and some of my takeaways over just the last few months. Like I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of like what I've been doing, but just some of the bigger picture stuff. And I'm going to start by saying I did not plan for what happened. I didn't sit down and decide all of a sudden I need a break. Like this wasn't necessarily a completely conscious choice on my part, but I didn't fight it when it came either. Like I think that was the big thing. Like some of this stuff that I'm going to talk about like rolled around and I just let it happen. I just let it happen. We can call it serendipity, which I have a sign over there. I love serendipity. Um, It I think it really was, like a lot of our habits and routines that we fall out of, right? We all have like workout routines that we quit doing or personal development habits or self-care habits, and we fall out of them. Um, for me, this happened really quietly. And I have to say, I'm specifically talking about the podcast and some other sort of business type related things, but specifically the podcast. Um, It happened sort of one day, one week, one decision at a time. I used to sit down on Saturdays to do some of the behind the scenes, like publishing and moving videos from StreamYard over to I used to do a lot of that on the weekends and just one weekend I didn't. And then the next weekend I didn't. And pretty soon it was a month and I hadn't. And I was like, it's fine, it's fine. And I never pushed myself, but here was the kicker, and here's why I let it happen. I didn't feel guilty about it, which tells me it was the right choice, right? I had zero guilt about it. I was like, it's fine. And I let it happen. Um, I just slowly sort of stopped creating and publishing. I've got episodes. There's a few guest episodes recorded that I haven't published. They'll pop up here, but I'll have to say, of all the things I'm going to talk about today, the most beautiful thing that happened when I quit creating and publishing, the world did not fall apart. Who knew? So, today I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we allow ourselves to pause. And like I said, I don't know about you, I hear it a lot in the feeds, my different feeds that I on social media and all that kind of stuff, but I want to talk about when we allow ourselves to pause and only stop forcing an output and we really trust the season that we're in. And I'm going to pause because I know some of you are going to be distracted by this. I'm not going to talk about this today. Stupid accident. It's broken. It's healing. It's fine. Um, but trusting the season we're in, I think that's going to be the biggest takeaway from today. Um, so let's look back a little bit. Let's back up to 4 months ago. When I look back, I realize that taking a break wasn't an accident. I had actually kind of started to on a bigger level anyways. It's not new information. I had been sharing already on here and on other platforms that um when my youngest moved out, I've said it in a million episodes on this podcast that when my youngest moved out, I downsized into a much smaller apartment. I, you know, I didn't date for a long time. I just took care of me. And as a matter of fact, as part of that, like I my cat, who I loved to death, like, one of my kids has him. I have completely sort of just taken a big deep breath from everything, right? And none it wasn't entirely by accident, I guess is my point to all that. But it also wasn't something I like, it wasn't, the fact that I needed a break wasn't really a message I wanted to hear, at least not when it came to my podcast, right? Um, I didn't wanna hear that. I was very scared, and I'm gonna talk about that here in a little bit too, but, like, I thought I sort of, quote, unquote, "had everything under control," maybe, I guess if you wanna word it that way. Um, but what I started to realize when I started to really reflect, like, when I just finally let go, what I realized is there's a creative spark, and if you were part of my email list, which I actually, excuse me, also no longer have, um, I sent an email about it, and I did a social media post about this, that I, as far back as I can remember, like 8th grade, even before that, there was this creative spark. I never would have defined myself as creative, but when it came to words, writing, as much as, as a kid and a teenager, you don't like public speaking, but just using my words, there was this creative spark that I had that really felt so natural to me. And when I did start public speaking, it brought me so much energy and joy. And that all really started to feel forced. I talked when I wrote this in an email, I talked about, the books that I've published and how even those, for as necessary as they were, and for as proud of them as I am, and for as grateful for the opportunity as I am to have had, to have been able to do that, there was a sense of forced, like, I'm supposed to do this for my business, and I'm supposed to do this, and, you know me, I talk on this podcast all the time about, like, getting rid of the shitty shoulds and getting rid of this idea of what I'm supposed to do, and yet here I was, like, living in that when it came to all my favorite things. I love doing this podcast. I love writing, and yet producing those things that I normally would love became a chore, and again, felt very forced. And even though my message was authentic, there was this sense of inauthenticity to it. Lord, yeah. Um, what I used to do with so much joy became another task on, you know, my endless to-do list, which we all have, right? We've all got these long to-do lists, and then we try to, and I don't care what your hobby is, whether it's, sewing or reading or hiking or client, whatever your hobby is, when you lose that spark to do it and you start doing it just because, it becomes a chore. And that's not good. Um, and if I'm being perfectly honest, I think I was really afraid to admit that because I wanted to be enjoying it. And I knew there were parts of it that I enjoyed. And so to admit that at my core, in my soul, I was not enjoying it, that was really hard for me to admit. So, and also, I think because we are so conditioned to keep going, I to push through. And I talked a little bit about this once before too, that when I started my business quite a long time ago now, I surrounded myself with people that I thought could support me, and they did support me in all the best ways they knew how. But there was always this message of, "Oh, you should do this because that's gonna help you grow your business. Oh, you should do this." Never once was there a message from anybody, including myself, of, "You should write a book because it's gonna be fulfilling for you. You should have a podcast because it's gonna be fulfilling for you." It was like those were business decisions, and there's a place for that, but this wasn't it, right? Because it, like, your creativity, whatever that is, whether it's, again, w whatever your hobby is, that shouldn't That shouldn't be a business decision. Doing stuff you enjoy, whatever, whether it's creative or whatever, that should just be because it's fulfilling, right? And we're so conditioned to keep going and keep pushing and pushing through and show up no matter what, show up no matter what. And when you have spent your whole life, and when I look back, it really has been a good portion of my life defining yourself by what you do. I did that. And in order to define myself by what I did, I had to do, right? Um, Stepping back had a little bit of a sense of almost, this might be overstating it a little, but there's like this underlying sense of like having a little bit of an identity crisis, right? Like I thought if I stopped doing the podcast or I stopped writing or I stopped coaching, I thought that I would be sort of denying myself or just not being myself. And yet the entire opposite is what was true. Um, Here's the thing. Sometimes the pause is exactly what we need to create, I'm sorry, what we need to reconnect to what truly matters. I needed this pause to reconnect to my creative side, to reconnect to the joy in being here and speaking to you guys and doing this podcast. I've been writing a little bit more, and it's been from this very authentic space. And I haven't really shared it, it's mostly been for myself, but one of my goals every day, and not on a you need to, but one of my goals is to allow myself space to just create for 30 minutes a day, anything, whether it's free write or be here speaking on the podcast and recording episodes and whatever, just create for 30 minutes. And it's been beautiful, right? Um, but I know there's a lot of us like taking a break, and I don't care who you are, I don't care if it's a break even just in your day-to-day 9 to 5 jobs, like to admit that you need a break is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. It feels like, I think, um, you're admitting some kind of failure, that you're not good enough. Um, I was afraid I would lose followers. I was afraid I would lose momentum. I was afraid I was going to go backwards. And we live in this world that we're so obsessed, just like I was talking about before. We're so obsessed with productivity and hustle, and this idea again that pausing feels like such a failure. Like you can't shoulder it. You're not strong enough. You're not whatever. Um, but we get this underlying message, and I think especially in today's climate, and I'm not trying to turn this into any kind of social or political statement or anything, but I think in today's climate, especially for women, if you are not constantly doing, you're falling behind, right? If you don't have the job and the family and you're not participating in every parent group or supporting your kids' sports by if you're not doing all the things, you're failing and you're falling behind. And I have to tell you, that is just not true. It is just not true. Um, and what I've discovered in my little hiatus here, which, in the grand scheme of my life, 4 months is not that long, but what I've discovered in this little hiatus is that the fear of stopping isn't about the break itself. It's about what's going to happen if you slow down long enough to feel. And there's a couple different pieces to that, right? Um, there's that fear of feeling like a failure. We don't want to feel like a failure. Um, So there's that. But the second piece, and this one took me a bit to get, so I need you to get on board with me here. Um, I think sometimes we are afraid to quiet ourselves, to pause, because sometimes the hustle and the grind and the constantly doing and all of that is our way to avoid uncomfortable feelings, not just the feeling of failure, but other uncomfortable feelings, right? Um, you guys know I've done a ton of work on healing some things, personal development, things like that. And I can say I've come a very, very long ways. Um, but I think there was a part of me that was very afraid to take it to what I'll call the next level, if you will, um, to quiet myself long enough to feel some of those uncomfortable feelings that were still in there, still sort of underlying, right? There were some things that were uncomfortable that I didn't want to feel. Things that over the last 4 months I've had to face and feel and deal with. And this pause has let me do that. But I think we're afraid of that. So we're afraid of the feeling of fear, and we're also afraid to feel whatever else is under there stirring the pot, so to speak, right? But here's what I want you to know. One, if you have those feelings stirring, they need to come up and they need to come out, honestly. Um, but here's the other thing. Rest is not quitting. Rest is not weakness. It is necessary. It is necessary. You cannot continue to grind and hustle in whatever area of your life you're grinding and hustling. Now, side note, sometimes, and I talk about this a lot too, sometimes there's a harmony we have to find where you're hustling and grinding in one area. So make sure then that you're pausing and resting in others. Okay. Um, but to hustle and grind and go and do all the time in every area of your life, mm-mm. The rest, the pause is necessary. Okay. So during my pause, my hiatus, whatever you want to call it, over the last 4 months, um, I remembered something really sort of profound. And this is not necessarily about the pause, but something I learned in the pause. Okay. What this pause, what this break has revealed to me. And it goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. If you are a creative of some sort, we are allowed to create without constantly striving to do it better, right? I know so many people who have podcasts or who are writers or who are speakers or who whatever. And I'm not saying you shouldn't want to improve, like that's part of the creative process, right? You create something, and again, I don't care what it is, visual art, music, whatever your creative outlet is, you create and then you reflect and you revise and you edit. Like that's part of the creative process. But you get to create just for the sake of creating. It doesn't have to be about anything else. You can just create. And I think that that was a message that I had completely forgotten. Completely forgotten. I've spent a good part of my life trying to improve, improve myself, improve my business, improve my relationships, like this constant, even in the last decade or so, where I've lived a lot in personal development and personal growth. It's always been about improving. And I saw the most beautiful quote the other day. I don't remember right now. Doesn't matter. And it wasn't even a quote. I'm going to paraphrase. But basically, it was stop manifesting. Like, stop trying to get things all the time. Stop trying to improve all the time. Because what if, hear me out, what if the best version of you, and I almost hate calling it the best, but the most aligned version of you is the one who's just here fully present in this moment, not constantly trying to fix and improve. And again, I'm not saying, if you've got things about yourself that you want to improve, go for it. I'm just saying, what if you did some stuff just for the sake of doing it? What if you were just present in this moment? As a parent, what would happen if you weren't trying to be a good parent? Like you weren't trying to be, let me rephrase the emphasis on that. You weren't trying to be a good parent. You just were a good parent. You were present. I was talking to a friend and colleague at work today, and she was talking about how she plays sports with her teenage son in the house, right? They kick the soccer ball around and they have an indoor basketball, like one of those little Nerf basketball hoops, and they play basketball and they do all these things. I was like, oh my God, she is so present for her kids. I love that. I wish I would have done that with mine a little more. I'm sure I did, but you know what I mean? I wasn't, she's not trying to be a good parent. She's being present with her kids. What if we took that mentality into all areas of our life? What might happen? I don't know. But I sure love the thought of doing that, doing less to be more present and experience life as it's meant to be. Yeah, I'm here for that. Um, through this break, I I have been blessed and had the most amazing opportunity to reconnect to things that truly light me up, including myself. I forgot a hoot. Um, reminding myself that I'm a good person, being present with myself, tapping into my creative side, being more present with my children, even though they don't live with me, and we've got a great relationship already, but being present, making an effort to go see them and visit with them and call them and calling my sister and calling my nieces and nephews and being present. Oh my God, it's been amazing. Things that truly light me up. That's all I'm here for now. If it doesn't light me up, I don't want any part of it. I've learned to trust. There's another big thing. I have learned to trust. I'm learning. I shouldn't say I've learned. I'm learning to trust the unfolding of things as they come rather than to control them. And holy shit, that's been a big one for me. That's been huge. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned out of all of this. Because if we kind of wind back to where we started this episode, everything I was doing in terms of my podcast, writing the books, doing all these coaching, all of it was to further my business and control the outcome. And if I do this and if I do that, then this one, it was always about controlling and moving the needle and doing all of that. And I have started to learn and embrace and be so excited about letting things unfold. That doesn't mean I don't do stuff. I'm here recording this episode, right? That's doing something. It's not like I'm doing nothing. It's just that I'm not trying to control it. Clearly, I could have done my hair up better for you guys. It was a long day at work and it was hot in our office and I could have done that. I could have controlled it. Just doing, letting it happen, right? And I finally am starting to understand. Again, I'm going to say starting to, or understanding. I'm learning to understand that being is just as valuable, if not more, than doing. And I've heard that message before. I've said that message before. I've shared it here. I've shared it on my social media. I know it, but now I know it. And now I feel it. And that's the difference. That's the difference. Feeling it and letting go of control. Oh my God, I can't tell you how that feels. It's amazing. Another lesson that I'm really trying hard to carry into the next season for me, because I feel like I'm at that point. Like these last months were a season. It was a season of rest. It was a season of hibernation. It was a season of, we've been using the word the whole episode, pause. My next season, I feel it coming. It's like there's this stirring inside of me. It's crazy and I love it. I'm here for it. And that's part of like allowing that unfolding. Like I feel it coming now, right? So I'm gonna go with it. But this lesson that I'm carrying into this next season is that life happens in cycles. And we, like, again, we know all this, you know all this, I know all of this, but like to really feel it and embody it and to acknowledge it and really absorb it is powerful in ways I couldn't even have imagined. But this idea that things are happening in cycles, we are not meant to constantly move forward. We're not meant to be in constant forward motion. Um, we are natural beings, and I don't want to get all super like woo woo on you here, but we are natural living beings, just like everything else in nature, and everything else in nature is in cycles. Everything. We've got moon cycles and seasons, and like it, everything runs in cycles. We also should be running in cycles, which means you're going to have seasons of hustle and creation and forward motion, but you need to harmonize that with seasons of stillness and reflection. And I know, again, that is super scary. We are afraid of that. We are so afraid of that because, right, our message is always moving forward. Train is always moving forward. We're always doing and we're hustling and grind. We are not meant to hustle and grind and move forward always. We have to pause. And there's sort of this adage, cliche, whatever you want to call it, floating around where like, think of the tree. Like every year, and again, I don't know, I see this on social media, I don't know if you guys have, but if you think of a tree, every autumn, they let go of their leaves and they just are, right? And then they know that come spring, there's going to be new leaves, there's new growth. And that's what happens with us. If you take a moment to just pause and hibernate and be still and reflect, there's gonna be more abundance, and by abundance, I don't know, leaves on the tree, like when bears come out of hibernate, whatever, however you wanna visualize it for yourself. There's going to be more on the other side. And I don't even wanna say more, but it's gonna be better on the other side, right? The magic happens when we stop resisting whatever season we're in. You've gotta just allow it to happen. We have to trust the rhythm of our own lives, and they're different for all of us. God, that's the beauty of it, right? I don't know, maybe over the last few months while I've been over here hibernating, you've been in a season of hustle. Great. Let it happen. Listen to your rhythm. What is your rhythm telling you? Trust it. If you're in a season where you feel a pull to slow down, honor that. Honor it. And I'm going to say honor it as best you can, right? Do I still hustle from 8 to 5? Yep, I hustle my ass off. But I can tell you that as soon as I come home, as soon as I punch out, as soon as it's the weekend, I, I do nothing. At least I have been just being. Again, being present with my family, being present with my friends, being present with things that align with who I am and what brings me joy. And so if you're in a season where you're feeling really called to slow down, and I know because of the world we live in, sometimes that really is actually logistically hard to do. Like I said, I can't slow down at my 8 to 5. I can't do that. But then I'm sure as hell gonna do it in other areas of my life. And it doesn't mean you're falling behind. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're preparing for what's next. The trees lose their leaves so that they can prepare for the new leaves in the spring. You are preparing for what's next. Let yourself, let it come, let it happen. Speaking of seasons, actually, this episode is dropping on the 1 year anniversary of this podcast. I can't even believe it. Holy crap. I know there have been some months now where there haven't been episodes, but we are coming up on a year and I'm counting it, right? This podcast needed a pause. And it did. It needed a pause. I needed a pause. It needed a pause. So we are at the 1 year anniversary mark, and I'm super excited about that. Um, I have to say, I didn't know when I started this a year ago what it would become, and I think I probably had visions that it would be much bigger than it is. Um, and I certainly didn't have plans to take a break from it. Um, but now, after a year of experimenting and learning and evolving, I feel like I'm hunching over. Um, experimenting, learning, evolving, growing, I know one thing, and I know this with all of my heart, that moving forward, I am going to be much more discerning about what I create across the board. I um, I have shut down most of my social media because I don't want to create for other people anymore. This podcast, sound really selfish. This podcast, but isn't for you. It's for me. That's not entirely true, but I think you get my drift. I'm going to be more discerning about what I create. I don't know yet what formatting looks like for this moving forward. I don't know if it's going to be solo episodes or guest episodes. I do know this. I know in the first season of this episode, I don't want to call it seasons like season 1, 2, 3, but like in the first sort of era of this podcast, I had a ton of guests. And I think it was out of fear of putting my own voice out there. I thought that there were others who knew better than me, others whose voices mattered more than mine, others who were smarter than me, lots of imposter syndrome. Okay. Um, and those guests were amazing. Their messages and stories were incredible and inspiring and insightful. Um, but again, for me, as the creator of this, there was an element behind the scenes that felt very forced for me. And I know that moving forward, I want every single episode to feel intentional and aligned and meaningful. And again, not that those didn't, but just from my energy, I need them to come from a more aligned space. There will be no more creating just to create, I guess. I think that was the thing, right? I would line up all these guests and I would do all these guest interviews and again, great, insightful, inspiring, like like amazing. But I was creating to create and I had guests on because I was supposed to. And I can't have any more forcing content just to stay on schedule. I also know that I am feeling very called to, as scary as it is to say this out loud, I am feeling very called to share my own thoughts and use my own voice more. It scares me to say that. It scares me to do that. It scares me to put myself out there like that, but I'm just feeling really called to do it. So as I step into the next year of this podcast and in my life, my real life, I am committing to, and I love this. I love this. This came to me and I'm going to put it on my bathroom mirror. Quality over quantity, depth over consistency, and joy over obligation. Mic drop. Let's say that again. Quality over quantity, depth over consistency, and by consistency, right? And joy over obligation. So if you have been waiting for someone to give you permission to take a break, first of all, you don't need it. But if you think you do, here it is. This is me giving you permission. Take the break. Um, Pause. Hibernate. Do what you got to do. Breathe. Take a breath. Because I have to say that's been I physically I'm breathing. Um, I didn't do it for the purpose of my physical health has improved because I've just trust that rest is part of your journey. It is not a detour from it. If you pause, if you rest, you're not going to miss out. There's no FOMO here. You're not going to get off track. It's just not going to happen. It's just a pause. You're going to pick up right where you left off, but you're going to have clearer intention moving forward, which means you're going to move forward farther faster. Okay? As I figure out what the next year of this podcast looks like, I just want to thank you now. I hope you'll stick around for whatever's to come. I really do, because I love doing this. I do. So I hope you'll stick around. I appreciate your grace as I figure out frequency of episodes, format of episodes. Um, so thank you for the grace. Please stick around because oh my God, I do. I love it. I had a long, busy day at work. I am exhausted and starving, but I am excited to be here right now doing this. Thank you for those of you who have been longtime followers, listeners, friends, um, for sticking through it with me, through being here through every season, every pause, every shift. There have been so many of them, so many of them. And I hope you start to have so many of them because I have to say that every time I take a pause, it is with a ton of trepidation. It is with a ton of guilt. It is with a ton of feelings of failure. And every time I come out of them, I feel so much better. And I think to myself, oh my God, like, I haven't, like, you, you just feel like you're losing traction. But every time I come out of it, I'm like, oh, yes, amazing. Um, so thank you for being here through all of that. Um, I would love to hear from you. I will say this. My business entity, like as a coach, I'm putting a pause on that. So for right now, that kind of no longer exists. I'm going to kind of shut it down. And if it comes around again someday, great. Right now, my sole focus is creating to create, period. Um, but if you want to connect with me, you can find me here on Substack. I can put my email in the show notes. But as far as business accounts, other social media, I am over on Instagram. The podcast has an Instagram. I have my personal Instagram. That one is just for me. It's not just my life, although it is. That one's just for me. I share things on my story that resonate with me. I don't post a lot on my actual feed. I'm just here living my life and I want to share it because I think that I have some lessons to share. So until next time, so find a way to reach me. It's not hard. Until next time, my friends, remember your life, your rules. You need the pause? Take the pause. I love you. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here. Um, One last quick thing before I actually sign off. I have a queue of a few guest episodes that I have not published yet. So those are going to be coming out in the coming weeks. And then after that, I don't know. It'll probably be me, if I'm being honest, for a little while. I just, like I mentioned earlier, the behind the scenes of logistics of coordinating with guests, it's always amazing. If you are a regular listener and there's somebody you think should be on here, feel free to send them my way. I'm happy to connect with them and figure something out. But um and like I said, I'll get those other guest episodes published, but right now, this is just going to be my creative space. I will be sharing writing here on Substack and these podcast episodes. And right now, that's what I have in me, and that's where my heart is being called to create and publish and share. So I love you again, and remember, your life, your rules. I will see you in the next episode.